'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the world, everyone was sleeping under their covers they curled, with inner scare sleep stories rolling round in their head, their dreams filled with fear, their hearts filled with dread. They listened so closely, with an intently trained ear. Inner scare put them to sleep, but they all slept in fear. Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true scary stories to help you fall asleep. I would like to wish all of you a very scary Christmas and a fearful New Year. Now, without further ado, please enjoy these true, scary Christmas stories. I also want to say that Inner Scare Wifey will be reading the first story in this video. Then after that, the stories will be read by me. Please enjoy.
Okay guys, I'm gonna keep this short. Yesterday evening, Christmas Eve, my fiancé and daughter came home from doing Christmas with my family to find a bullet had been shot into my daughter's room. We called the police, took pictures of the points of impact, and looked for the bullets. We couldn't find the bullets, but the officer took a report, and the apartment maintenance came to take a look. Fast forward to tonight. Getting home from Christmas with my fiancé's family and picking up his daughter for the week. We've just moved in, so we asked them to straighten up their toys to the right places. 5 minutes later, my 6-year-old daughter comes running to the living room yelling, "Mama, I think I found the bullet." Sure enough, she had found it under her bed. I collected the bullet, hooray for a CSI degree. As my fiancé called the police, we turned the bullet in. So person who shot into my 6 and 7-year-old daughter's room, you better pray we don't meet.
The year was 2008. I am a 28-year-old female, and I had an unusual visitor on Christmas Day. At the time, I was living in Indiana. The day started out like normal, opening gifts in front of a roaring fire with the twinkle of Christmas lights on the 8-foot pine in the living room. I served an early dinner for my family and a few friends, and everyone went home by 6 p.m. Everyone except my sister and brother-in-law, who are my roommates. They went to bed early in their room at the end of the hall with the door open. I went to my room with my dog, Bernard. I shut my door tight. I was just dozing off when I heard the knob turn. It began to slowly open. I waited for a second as I thought it was my sister coming in to ask something. It was almost 7, so my room was completely dark. I had left the lights on the Christmas tree glowing, so there should have been at least a little bit of light in the hallway. I should have been able to see whoever was entering my room. I pushed my blankets down and lifted my head off my pillow, and was blinded by a bright flash in my eyes. I covered my eyes with my hands and screamed, "Turn off that effing light, are you crazy?" The light immediately turned off, and I heard the thud of boots running down the hall. Bernard sprang into action and barked like crazy, and started running down the hallway. The bedside lamp is a touch light, so I tapped it on. My heart was pounding like crazy. I ran down the hall to my sister's room. She was asleep. I immediately got my phone and dialed 911. There was broken glass on one of the panes of my back door. Glass shards all over the floor. My dog was barking up a storm. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. Apparently, there had been a wave of burglaries in the area over the few weeks prior. They never found the guy who did it. to the criminal who broke in on Christmas and who I thought might be Santa, let's not meet again. This happened in 2019. I was in my second year of college and living in a townhome about a 10-minute walk from campus. I lived with 2 other girls at the time, but they were all back at their parents' house for the holiday. I work in healthcare and was working Christmas this year. A little bit of backstory. There used to be 4 of us living there, but one girl had moved out due to issues with her boyfriend. He was a jackass who abused our kindness on allowing him to stay there. He was only supposed to come every so often, but he basically ended up living there. We told her she needed to kick him out after an incident with him one night where he got physical with her and verbally abusive with the rest of us. She wouldn't listen, and we told her we would have to talk to the landlord then. Long story short, she ended up moving out and left on bad terms with us. On another side, not here, I have been in physically, mentally abusive relationships before, so I understand how things may have been going for her. I tried my best for 2 years at that point to help open her eyes, to see the abuse and to get away from him. At this point, it was affecting everyone, and we didn't feel safe from him. So, she moved out. Okay, back to the story. It was Christmas Eve, and I worked the next day, so I was getting ready for bed. I locked the doors, turned the lights off, and went downstairs where my bedroom was. I was scrolling on TikTok for about an hour. It was Christmas Day at this point, when I heard what sounded like the chairs in the kitchen move. The kitchen is right above my bedroom. I thought maybe I was hearing the neighbors next door, as we share the same walls and sometimes they can be loud. But I remember one of them texting me and asking me to bring in a package they were expecting while they were all gone at home. The noise was short-lived, and so I brushed it off. Next thing I know, my bedroom door is being opened slowly. In this moment, I get a flashback and remember my second grade teacher telling us about a time that someone broke into her house and she acted if she were asleep. So if they were just there to rob her, they wouldn't feel the need to hurt her if she saw them. But my phone screen is lighting up my scared, jaw-dropped face, so I can't act like I'm asleep. Where I'm laying in bed faces directly to the door, so we're just looking right at each other. So there I was, laying in my bed, scared to death, while this guy has one foot in my bedroom with the door cracked open. It felt like an eternity, but in reality was probably more like 10 seconds of us looking at one another. He slowly takes his foot out and closes my door. I sit there just in complete and utter shock. I couldn't make out what he looked like, as my eyes were adjusting to the dark again from the phone screen. All I could see was a backwards baseball cap. I knew I had to call the police. But I knew that if I called, it would alert my parents' phones that I had called. Me being dumb was like, well, I don't want to make them worry. Also, I was scared he might still be somewhere in the house, and I didn't know what he would do if he heard me call. So I text the guy I was seeing at the time and tell him some random guy just broke into my house and came into my room. He snapped me out of it and told me to call the police, so I did. The dispatcher asked me if I felt comfortable to go unlock the front door for them so they didn't have to break it down. And I told her no way, I don't care if the door is broken, I'm not going up there alone. A couple of minutes later, I see flashlights shining through my window. I hear the police knocking at the door and announcing themselves. They got in and asked me where I was. I came out of my room and they came and got me. They told me to wait on the back porch while 2 of them searched the house and 1 stayed with me. It was like that stuff that you see in movies, where they have their guns and turn the corner with their partner and everything. They didn't find anyone, and I said nothing looked like it had been taken. They even tried to get fingerprints, but they were unsuccessful. They even started asking me questions and informed me that the back door was unlocked and had no signs that it had been broken. I told them I locked it. Luckily, the guy I was talking to stayed with me that night, but I still couldn't sleep. I kept having to go check every inch of the house over and over. I placed chairs under the door handles on the front door, back door, and my bedroom. The next day I informed our landlord, and she refused to come out and change the locks, and she never ended up changing them for the rest of the time we lived there. Every time I go to bed now, I triple check all the doors have been locked. Doesn't even matter where I am. I have a dog now, and he helps me with my anxiety of intruders, as well as a recent purchase of a Ring doorbell. I believe it was our old roommate's boyfriend. I think they may have made an extra key for him because he was basically living there, but I don't understand why he didn't do anything to me, to the house, or to our belongings. If it were someone random, I don't know why they wouldn't have done what they intended, and that could have been many different possibilities. I don't know what their intentions were that night, but to the man who broke into my house on Christmas Eve, let's not meet again. The true origin of the Mistletoe Bride came from the disappearance of Lord Lovell's bride at the Bramshill House in Hampshire, England. Lord Lovell was preparing to wed a young woman related to Sir Jean Cope, the owner of Bramshill House. This was shortly before Christmas, so mistletoe hung throughout the mansion, inspiring the wedding party to play a game. The young bride-to-be would hide somewhere in the mansion. The groomsmen would seek her out, and whoever found her first got to kiss her. The minutes passed and turned into hours, and they still could not find her. Eventually, the game turned terribly serious, as no matter where they looked, she remained missing. The police were called out. Search parties scoured the snowy surrounding woods and nearby towns. Over 50 years later, a crew was working on renovating the mansion for a new owner. A crew member pried some wooden panels off the wall in the attic, and inside found a wooden hope chest. They used to give these to brides to store their dresses and wedding keepsakes. It had a small lock on the clasp. He banged the lock off with a crowbar and found the nearly unrecognizable remains of the young bride. My parents and I lived in a small home that was around 90 years old. That year would have been 1988. We lived there from the time I was 7 years old until I was about 19. From the very day we moved in, I felt we were not alone. Doors closed on their own, dishes and decorations would somehow find their way into the floor every night, and lights would flicker. One year, around Christmas time, I was having a friend spend the night. The heater had shut off briefly, and she and I were sitting in the living room watching cartoons. The temperature dropped significantly. As I rose to turn up the heater, the Christmas tree began to violently shake. Ornaments were falling off left and right. She and I were terrified. We ran upstairs and laid on my bed, hiding under the covers. My white cat curled up with us, and my door was open slightly. When I peeked out at the dark hallway, I was horrified to see a tall white figure float past my door. I turned to my friend as I screamed, and she acknowledged that she had seen the exact same thing. My parents did not believe us, and she never spent the night again. My mother, to whom I was very close, passed away in 1964 when I was 17 years old. I left home that year and moved to Ontario from Nova Scotia. In 1969, I met a girl who I will call Karen. We got married in March of 1970. In December of 1971, we were expecting our first child. We were living in a small 1.5 bedroom bungalow. There was a fireplace in the living room. My wife and I loved the fireplace, and we had it lit every night. It was Christmas Eve, 1971, and we had just finished putting a few gifts under the tree, and a nice fire gave off a beautiful glow. On the tree, one string of lights that was supposed to blink had stopped several days before. It was 5 minutes to midnight when the fireplace suddenly just about went out, and the string of lights started to flash, and the other lights stopped working completely. My wife and I were sitting on the floor, and it became very chilly. I looked over to my lazy boy chair, and a figure was sitting there. My mother, with a big beautiful smile on her face. My wife, who had never met my mother, could see the same thing. This ghost never spoke, but just kept looking at me and my wife, smiling. At 12 midnight, the fire in the fireplace started up again. I looked back to the last string of working Christmas lights. They were dead. I glanced at the chair and my mother was gone. No matter what I did after that, those lights never turned on or worked again. This happened in 2005 during Christmas vacation. I moved away for college and came back home to visit for the holidays. Spent a week in my hometown in a snowy state. On my last night there, my friend and I decided to go sledding at 3 a.m. We get in our car and both go down a few times. We're both at the top of the hill. She gets ready to go again, but I stop her. She asked what's wrong, and I tell her that I had had a bad feeling. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up and I felt nervous. I told her we need to leave now. We drive back to my family home. We live in a town where no one locked their doors. The crime was almost nothing, and all the neighbors knew each other. When we get back, something told me to lock all the doors. Then I checked the windows and several were unlocked. My flight was only 4 hours away to go back to campus. I slept for maybe 2. I wanted to see the snow and smell the fresh air, so I stepped outside. I looked at a huge pine tree we had in the front/side of our yard. I always thought the way snow laid on the branches looked so beautiful, and something caught my eye. What should have been pure fresh snow was littered in huge man-sized footprints. They wrapped around the tree and went towards the backyard. I was thinking maybe my uncle had been out there smoking or something. Just thinking of anything trying to rationalize why those prints were there. The same feeling came back to me when we were sledding. The anxious and paranoid feeling in the pit of my stomach. I look to my left and I see a man. He's running, sprinting, staring straight at me. He was probably close to 300 pounds and maybe 6 feet. And for his size, he was super fast. I froze in fear with the realization that he's not just doing a morning jog, and he is coming straight at me. I tried to move several times, but I was almost too scared. With everything in me, I opened my front door, slammed it shut and locked it. I run to the window and look onto my porch and see the man standing there. He has his hand on my door. He turns his head and I follow his gaze to a man in a white van. The guy in the van throws up his hands in a gesture to say, "Well?" The runner just threw up his hands and shook his head. The runner walks to the van, gets in, and they drive away. My heart's still pounding. I wake up my friend and make her walk around the house with me. There we find the footprints. Went to every door and window around my house. She too tried to rationalize it. But to me, I know if he had reached me, I wouldn't be writing this post. The malicious look on his face as he ran to me told me everything. This happened over 20 years ago. I was driving back home with my girlfriend at the time. It was Christmas Eve, and my mother's family used to hold a large celebration at my aunt's house in Estacada. This was my girlfriend's first time meeting with my extended family, but she got on quite well with them. We spent the majority of the afternoon and evening talking, playing poker, opening presents, and drinking an assortment of adult beverages. My girlfriend had been quite inebriated by the time that we had to leave. Therefore, I'd be driving us home. It was around 11 p.m. or so. I was driving my girlfriend's car along Highway 211. Now, this stretch of road is surrounded by farms and dense patches of forest, and parts of it are unlit. But nothing to fear. I grew up in this area, so I knew this road like the back of my hand. The both of us were just driving and talking away, just two young lovers making the most of our moment together. There's a portion of the highway that descends down an enormous hill before crossing Deep Creek. Surrounding both sides of the road are thick forests. There are no lights. The only thing that we could see was the area directly in front of our headlights. I drive down the hill, cross the bridge, and uphill through more forests. It's as the highway starts to flatten out that it happens. Something sprints across the road so suddenly that I almost hit whatever it was. I slam on the brakes. I turn to my girlfriend and ask her if she saw it. She confirmed that she had, but she couldn't make out what it was. Maybe it was a coyote, as they are a fairly common sighting in the area. But something felt off about it. Whatever it was that ran in front of our car disappeared into the woods next to the road. Coyotes don't usually dart out in front of cars. Not like that anyway. So for some reason I decided to go check it out. I turn the car around and switch on the high beams to better light up the forest in which this thing had vanished in. I step out of the car and walk towards the woods. I don't see anything. But now it feels like perhaps I'd made a grave error. My heart is pounding and the hairs on the back of my neck are standing at full attention. But I still don't see anything unusual in the trees. Suddenly the car's horn blasts. It's not a beep, beep, beep that you'd get if you say your driver or passenger wanted to hurry up and get in the car. No, this was a long, blaring beep. I walk back into the car and ask my girlfriend why she leaned on the horn like that. She said nothing. Instead, she pointed to a spot about 50 feet from where I was standing. I looked over in that direction, and that's when I saw it. Surely this was the thing that ran in front of our car. It was a man. He was completely naked. His skin was covered in dirt and mud, and in one of his hands he was holding a hatchet. He looked back at us, and then he smiled and waved to us just before turning around and walking back into the forest. Needless to say, we got the hell out of there. Once we were safely driving again, my girlfriend explained what had just happened. While I was trying to look for the man in the area he initially vanished in, he circled back around and came out from another spot in the forest beyond my car headlights. My girlfriend had seen something out of the corner of her eye, and that's when she saw him. Before she honked the horn, he was walking towards me, his hatchet raised as if making to strike me. We called the authorities once we safely got back home, but they never found anybody. Or they did and just didn't tell us. But the officer we spoke to explained his theory. The man was obviously looking to ambush unsuspecting lone travelers for Lord only knows what reason. We all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking saved my life, as it let my potential killer know that I wasn't alone out there. I moved back into my area recently, so I now drive that highway often. No naked hatchet man sightings yet, but I can tell you that I am definitely extra vigilant now, especially near Deep Creek. There's a lot that happened within our family before this event, so let me explain. My mom's brother, who for the sake of this story I'll call Clark, has been married to this woman for over 20 years now, and they have one child together. Growing up, I have always been told that my aunt was a little off and was instructed by my mother to stay clear of her if I had the chance. She seemed pretty normal to me until I was around 10, and she started harassing my mother and my grandparents. She would hit on my grandfather and show up to their house unannounced and would occasionally try to start fights. We had to block her on all our phones, and my uncle was told that she is no longer allowed on ours or our grandparents' property. Years had gone by without much issue towards us, but for the past few years, she's been mentally abusing my uncle along with my cousin, and once, in a fit of rage, she peed on the floor in front of my cousin. Yes, full-on squatted and relieved herself. My cousin has since moved out. With all the background information out of the way, let's get to the main story. It was Christmas Eve a year ago, and as for tradition, we were having dinner at my grandparents' house. It was my grandparents, mom, dad, brother, uncle, cousin, and their dog Holly. We're at the dinner table, which is in view of the front porch windows, when we heard the doorbell ring furiously and the door being pounded on. As we looked over at the windows, who do we see? Her. My uncle gets up and goes outside to talk to her. From the table, we can hear a bit of yelling, and my uncle opens the door and comes back in when all of a sudden, she grabs the dog and threatens to take it away if my uncle didn't give her money. At this point, my parents are outside watching, along with a few neighbors. My uncle gets in the car with her, and before she gets in to go drive, she yells, "What the F are you looking at? I know I'm beautiful, and God loves me." Then she gets in the car and speeds off. So we're all at the windows, stunned and confused. All the while, my cousin is texting his father to make sure he's okay. He lets us know that he is, and that he was going to an ATM to get her some money so that they would leave her alone. About an hour or so later, my uncle gets back with the dog and tells us that she was basically holding him hostage because he didn't give her enough money. But finally, with a bit of bribing, she brought him back, and I haven't seen her since. The rest of the night obviously had a lot of tension, and I watched the road behind us all the way home, scared that she was following us. Since the incident, things have escalated at their house. We've found out that she is doing drugs and has been cheating on my uncle for a while now. For those asking why we didn't call the cops, he told us not to. I don't know why, but he hasn't done much about her except tell her that he wants a divorce. But nothing has come of that. I'm posting this from my cell phone. So for context, I'm a 22-year-old male, and I live in a large city in the Midwest. Now, I drive for Lyft while putting myself through trade school. I drive for other similar companies, but that's besides the point. I have many horror stories from those as well, but I'll tell those another time. It was Christmas Eve 2020. I was out running Lyft for a few hours before heading to my mom's with my new baby and wife. Nothing special going on for the night, just the usual. I get a ride request. It was a pickup from this kind of lower income apartment complex. No big deal. I arrive and I find my passenger. He has all his belongings, several boxes and stuff. Now my car is a 2006 Chevy Impala, so it's not too big. We get all his stuff loaded up, barely, and are on our way. During the ride, he's crying, saying his girlfriend was cheating on him, and he had walked in on them earlier that night. He couldn't stay there because it was her name on the lease, so I was taking him to a hotel. Now in my city, we have a street that is well known for having vices, hookers, drugs, gangs, weapons, and shady motels. The works. We get to the motel. He asks me to wait for him to check in and get his key. No problem, man, I say. I'll confess, I break the rules a little while it comes to Lyft. I have a gun hidden in a concealed holster secured to the underside of my driver's seat for protection. Reason being, driving Lyft and other contract apps, I've had knives and guns pulled on me, as well as people have tried to fight me, rob me, and all kinds of other things. But like I said, another time. This motel was on the street that I mentioned before. Homeless people were everywhere. There was a dude on the far corner of the complex that still had a needle in his arm, passed out against the building. And I'm a big fan of true crime and horror narration, so I'm on edge. He gets his key. The whole motel is ground level. So, to help the guy out, I drive to his door. As I mentioned before, he had a lot of stuff. So I started to help him unload his stuff. While on my second trip getting stuff, I saw a guy come out of a room just to the south of my car, followed by two ladies. They came up to the room I was next to, not my passengers. One of the ladies pounded on the door, then opened it. That's when I saw the guy raise a shotgun up out of his long coat and storm into the room. The two ladies followed him, slamming the door behind them. Following, I heard a lot of yelling and shouting. I was just waiting for shots to ring out. Out of nowhere, my passenger came up behind me. "I can take this, man. Go ahead and take off. Have a Merry Christmas." And he gave me a cash tip. I didn't even notice he took the boxes out of my hands or slid a $5 bill in my pocket. I was frozen. I knew what may have been going down in that room. I had to leave, or at least get to where I could get my gun. I knew the guy and ladies both saw me. And I knew they knew I saw the gun. I had to get out of there. You know, no witnesses. I got in my car and sped away quickly. I got a block or so away and called the cops. I gave them every detail. After I got off the phone with the police, I signed out of Lyft. I hadn't made much money, but I was done. I got a call later that night. The cops investigated. They never found the gunman or the women. They never answered the door I saw them come out of. And the occupants of the room they went into said nothing had happened. And I was full of crap. Well, I know what I saw. A little background first. This happened about 4 years ago. At the time, I was around 8 months pregnant, so very noticeable, and was doing some Christmas shopping at the local mall. It was around 9 at night. I finished up my shopping and headed out of the mall towards my truck. At this mall, there is a road that goes around the mall, and his parking is on the other side of this road. Therefore, you have to cross the road to get to the parking area. As I'm leaving the store, I happen to notice a man standing in the middle of the road. He looked in my direction and made eye contact. I looked away and kept going. At this time, there are two men that walk past him to go into the mall. He never looks at them or says anything to them, but kept his eyes on me. I noticed that he started to walk in my direction, but I just kept on strolling to my vehicle. Then I hear, "Excuse me, can you help me?" Being Southern has its downfalls, and one of those is having it ingrained into you to be polite. I simply just asked, "What do you need?" He looked around and said, "Could you help me start my car? I think my battery is dead." I may be Southern, but I'm not that polite, nor am I stupid. Please remember that I am very much pregnant and a woman walking alone in a parking lot. If he was really having car trouble, is it likely that he would ask a pregnant woman for help rather than two men that had just walked past him? Doubtful. At this point, I know it's time to go, so I just say sorry, I can't help, and keep on walking. A little faster this time. I still see him out of the corner of my eye following me. I have my keys out and I'm ready to go as soon as I make it to the truck. He's still coming. "You really aren't going to help me? I just need a jump." Again, I say nope, Sorry. Finally, I get to my truck, unlock it, and jump in. He is practically running towards me now. I lock the doors and try to get the key in the ignition, but I was shaking, and at that moment, the dang key would just not fit into the ignition. He gets to the truck and hits my window, saying, "I just need your help for a minute." Now I'm starting to get angry and yell, "No, get the hell away from me." He grabs the door handle and tries to open my door and screams, "Just open the door." Here's where I lost my cool and made a split-second decision. I have my concealed carry license, because there have been other reasons that I needed protection that I will not go into here. However, I did have a .38 special in my console that I do know how to use. When he tried to open my door, my only thought was to protect my child and myself. I rolled the window down, grabbed the .38 and pointed it right in his face and said, "I'm not going to tell you again. Get the F away from me." He stood there for a moment, in shock I'm sure. In that moment, time stopped. I didn't know what he would do, but I knew that I was prepared to use the gun if he made any move towards me. He didn't. He didn't say a word. He turned and ran. I know I should have gotten the heck out of Dodge, but I couldn't. All I could do was just sit there in shock. I was terrified of not only what he may have done to me, had I not felt that something was wrong, but also that I had just threatened to kill someone. Not a situation that I ever want to be in again. However, should it happen, I still have that .38, and it is loaded and ready to go. So when I was 7 or 8 years old, my parents took me to a Christmas market that had tons of activities for kids. I didn't know this at the time, but my parents were fighting, and thus preoccupied and just mostly left me on my own. The way it worked was you bought some vouchers at the door and could then go inside and use one voucher for one activity. There was stuff like baking cookies, painting, and wood burning for older kids, etc. It was pretty fantastic. Some of the stuff had lines if there was a lot of interest. Now, I'd gotten about 10 vouchers. An activity is about 15 minutes. And my parents were in a cafe in the building, but well out of sight. Since it was an area you can only get into if you accompanied a kid, or were a kid, I guess they felt safe leaving me alone. This was allowed, but not encouraged. Anyway, I was queuing for my favorite activity there, the fabric painting section, where you got a piece of linen and could draw Christmas patterns and stuff on it. It was already my third time, but whatever. I had to queue. When I was about halfway to the entrance, someone grabbed my arm. I panicked immediately because my parents would never have touched me like that, and I knew nobody else there. I yelped and tried to pull away but couldn't. Turning, I saw it was an older lady, maybe 40s to 50s, not sure. She was well dressed, looked pretty strict but normal. Anyway, she was pulling me out of the queue against my will. I tried to yell and asked her to let me go, but she just said something like, "You always do this. Come on, Marie." My name is not Marie. Not even close. I yelled as much, still thinking that she just confused me for someone else. I was a pretty average-looking girl with a brunette ponytail. Nothing particularly special, nor were my clothes. She looked down at me again, scoffed, and told me to stop throwing a tantrum, and that we were going home. It was at that exact moment that I realized if I didn't escape, she would take me away. So I just basically opened my mouth and screamed at the top of my lungs. Not a word, just a screech. Before that, I'd mostly asked to be released. Loud, but not full-on screaming. I was a polite kid. She paused mid-step, because clearly I'd startled her, but didn't let go yet. So I just screamed about the only thing I could really make sense of. My name is Sam. This was the first time that people actually looked at us more than a mom/grandma and a kid in a tantrum. Because I'm clearly too old to not know my name, and I'm also visibly scared. I made eye contact with the first random person I saw looking over. A guy, early 30s I guess, definitely younger than her. I just pled for him to help me, and he actually came over at that point. We were in sight of the exit. She dragged me quite far, and I guess at that point she decided it was too much of a hassle and let me go. Since I'd been fighting her, I immediately slammed into the ground, which actually prompted more people to step up to help. I was sobbing, and as soon as I could get my feet, I ran the other way to my parents. I must have barreled into 10 plus people and kids on the way to where I knew my parents were. It was a cafe like I said, and they were in the middle. My mom had super recognizable fake hair, so even sobbing, I could see her easily. I banged into a table, knocked stuff off, and just threw myself at my mother. I was in no state to explain, and she was both mad at me for making a scene and really worried because I was not the type of kid to cause a disturbance. Pretty much ever. I wanted to explain but couldn't. There was a bit of commotion around with people being nosy, but as I calmed down, I realized that the guy that I had begged for help was explaining to my parents what had happened. I hadn't even noticed him come with me, but I kinda tuned in when he kept asking if my grandma was here or something. Not even in the same country. It was just me and my parents. And if I could have known her, etc. Obviously, my mother confirmed that that was not the case, and asked what he'd told her was right. He'd confirmed that some woman was dragging me off calling me Marie. My parents, the guy, his son, who was a fair few years older than me, maybe 15 or so, went with me to security, where I tried and failed to describe the lady. The guy had a much better description of her, but she was obviously long gone. I think they called the police, but I never spoke to any cops that I can remember. I felt really awkward and sorry that I ruined the other kid's day, so I gave him the rest of my vouchers so he could go do more stuff if he wanted. He was really nice and gave me a pack of the cookies he baked to eat while the adults were talking. I don't remember any of their names or anything, but I remember how grateful I was to the kid. More so than his dad even. It just really comforted me that I had another kid around who was nice. Anyway, my parents took me home ASAP, of course, and we never went to that place again. There was a short story in the newspaper the next day about a kidnapping scare. My mother told me some years later, but it was all just speculation, and they didn't even confirm in the paper if it was an attempt or just a misunderstanding. Well, it sure wasn't just a misunderstanding. They never caught the lady, or did any follow-ups, etc. as far as I'm aware. I actually had bruises on my arm where she gripped me through my sweater. And honestly, I still don't like Christmas markets much. First off, I'm living very rural, in a small village with maybe 10 to 15 houses, but close to the highway. You can drive there within maybe 5 minutes, and also about 10 minutes away from the town. If you cross the street, it just takes you about a 10-minute walk to reach the forest. First Christmas Day, in the afternoon, my partner and I decided to go for a little digestive walk, as we were really stuffed from all the food. It was about 5 o'clock, and already dark when we left. We had a big and bright LED flashlight with us. I also took my camera and my flash, as I love taking pictures of nature at night. We decided to walk on a little country road towards the forest and then turn right, following a small graveled cycle track close to the forest border. which connects our village and the next maybe 15 to 20 minutes walk between villages. In the middle part of the truck, you have to walk through a small bit of forest. It's rather dark, and the trees are very high and quite dense. When we entered, I saw our flashlight reflecting on something, and recognized a car being parked there on the side of the track, close to the trees. This struck me as odd, as cars are not allowed to drive through there, and the path is very narrow and hidden, so I was a bit cautious. My partner pointed the light inside the car, and it seemed to be empty. I also noticed the windows were frozen, so it must have been parking there for a while. A bit in front of the car, I spotted a tree with an intriguing structure, and I asked my partner to point the flashlight towards it, so I could focus better and photograph it with my flash. After I took a few images, my partner told me, is there someone standing behind us in the middle of the road? He's looking at us. Nobody was following us the whole way. I kept looking around and behind us occasionally, because at this time in the evening and close to the border of the forest, there are boars sometimes, and it's mating season, so they're more aggressive than usual. Indeed, there was a man standing behind us, just out of the flashlight's reach. He wasn't saying anything, just standing there and facing us. At first, I thought he might have been startled, as it may seem a bit weird if someone's just taking photos around your car. It was not even legal to drive on that path with the car. I decided to get up and confront him from the distance, explaining to him that I was just taking photos of that tree. He didn't react and still just stood there. I then went on to ask him if he needed some light, and he replied that that wasn't necessary. It was odd, but I was still calm, sure about there being a normal explanation for his behavior. Nonetheless, my partner and I decided to just get the crap out of there and followed the path leading to the next village. It was maybe 5 to 7 minutes until we reached it. I remembered the letters on his license plate, not the numbers though, unfortunately, and Googled it, and it turned out that he was from a city about 6 hours away from our village. Mind you, the country I live in is a very strict lockdown right now, so you're only allowed to travel, even by car, if you have very urgent reasons. After we reached the first lantern of the next village, we looked back and observed the car driving a bit out of the forest, turning around and going back inside. I was able to see that he parked there again and turned the lights off. He didn't leave the forest. We then went home on a much longer way than we initially intended, as I didn't want to go back there for obvious reasons. Our flashlight battery died on the way and my phone battery was low, so I didn't want to call the police back then, but I called them as soon as I arrived home and gave them all the details. Big regret that I didn't memorize the whole license plate, but it was just so surprising that I seriously didn't even think about it. Also, it only occurred to me as really strange when I thought about the frozen windows, and that he could possibly have walked behind us. Plus him having no light and not responding. He did seem to be sneaking up on us when I sat down to take the photo. I think I was very lucky to have my partner, the camera, and the bright light with me. I don't want to imagine what would have happened if I was alone. This happened to my family when I was like 11 or 12. Background: we live in a small, close-knit southwestern town. My house is pretty small, only 1 story, and about 100 years old. Family of 4. My parents, me, and my younger brother by about 5 years. We used to leave our front door unlocked, mostly because we didn't ever think something like this could happen in our town. It was Christmas night, so we all went to bed pretty early, since we're more of a Christmas Eve type of family. Me and my younger brother had each gotten $200 cash from my grandpa to help pay for our summer camps as a Christmas gift, and it was sitting in my mom's desk drawer inside her very tiny office. At some point during the night, the money was stolen, along with my mother's car, which was probably crashed down the street. I was asleep on the living room couch, which is right next to our front door. Important note, our front door is loud. It's made of really old wood and is super heavy, so it creaks almost every time you open it. Our 2 back doors were locked, so they must have come in through the front. So basically, whoever it was must have walked within a foot of me to get inside the house. That's creepy and off-putting. But what really gets me is my mom's car. My mom keeps her car keys in her jacket pocket, which hangs inside my parents' bedroom on the wall across from their door. Again, you have to walk within a foot of my parents' bed to even get there. But even if my parents had slept through a nearby intruder, how did they know where my mom kept her keys, or where she hung her jacket every night? It's not an obvious spot to put your keys, and they apparently knew exactly where to go. Even grabbing the cash from the desk drawer makes sense. A lot of people keep important stuff there. The car thing just doesn't make sense to me. Also, they crashed it right down the street, like literally into the telephone pole at the end of our street. So we figure they were probably drunk, which raises even more questions. How were they able to open our super loud door and walk right by me without even noticing? And how were they able to steal the cash and my mom's keys from right under our noses? Both me and my mom assume that it's probably someone that we know/knew, but we have no idea who, and we probably never will. This happened in December of 2011, while I was on college semester break. Alright, so I grew up in rural Texas with about 1,000 people in my hometown. Shortly after my parents' divorce, I moved to a large city for college, and made it a tradition every year to visit my family for the holidays in the boonies of Texas. After the divorce, my mom had just recently moved to a nearby town, around 100 people, where her house was located on the very outskirts of town, surrounded by miles of cornfields in almost every direction of her home. There was a paved road about 100 feet of her house that basically was a dead end until you reached a certain point, and directly across the other side of the road was in fact miles of fields of corn. The only neighbor she had was about a half-mile north of her house, who was a truck driver and basically was never home much of the year. Anyway, needless to say, it was pretty secluded, and pretty much the only thing close to civilization was about 15 to 20 miles away. This particular winter break was different, because my mom and brother, who lived in the same city as me attending a different college, was going to travel to Boston to visit my grandparents, and my mom needed someone to dog sit while they were away. So after a few days of having the house to myself in the middle of nowhere, I'm particularly bored, so I decide to put the harness on my dog and take a walk around the area in no particular direction. We finally ended up following the dead-end road and turned back as it starts to get darker, and the wind starts picking up because a cold front was coming through. By this time, I am slightly more frustrated with myself, because I could start to smell the rain, and my dog, a dachshund, can be particularly stubborn, because he basically likes to wonk me instead of the other way around. Anyway, as we start walking back, it's starting to get a bit more colder, and it is drizzling now, and I start to walk a bit faster. We're almost jogging back now to the house when all of a sudden my dog stops abruptly. I initially think it's just him being stubborn, but he starts leading me into the direction of the cornfields. I'm thinking that this is just one of those cases where he locks onto a scent and cannot let it go until he goes directly up to it, or I have to pick him up to lead him back on track. Well, I basically don't allow him to go very far, and we are directly in front of the fields, when all of a sudden he starts barking, similar to how he barks when he sees another person. He's not friendly to other people. I finally pick him up and we run back home, both pretty damp and cold by now. I dry up and then take a bath, since the house had no showers. It's evening time now, and after making something to eat, my dog and I start winding down for the night. We watch a bit of TV in the living room, and by 10 p.m. call it for the night. It's still very much cold and windy outside at this time, though it never did storm, only rained a bit. We go into the bedroom and my dog burrows underneath the blankets, and I pass out shortly after. Several hours later, I wake up to my dog awake and growling on my bed in the direction of the window. I hear rustling outside and think that it's likely other animals, but I'm still kind of drowsy, so I get out of bed and pick up my dog and corral him into the living room couch, where I turn on the TV to drown out the rustling noises. My dog burrows underneath the blankets again, and I'm just about to fall asleep when I hear a thud outside. I'm like, what was that? And of course, my dog is wide awake again, barking and growling underneath the blankets. Anyway, I'm pretty much wide awake now, and I kind of start getting annoyed with my dog, so I basically turn up the TV to hopefully drown out the rustling outside once again. I swear to God, 25 minutes later at 1:30 a.m. I hear a knock on the back door. All hell broke loose with my dog, and literally is about to jump off the couch and dash to the door. I caught him last minute, and started to just hold him in place while we're both freaking out. I'm like, WTF? Please no. Please let this be my imagination. Anyway, I really don't remember what I did at that very moment, but somehow my dog started to calm down again, and I'm pretty sure I blacked out because there is a literal period of time that I don't remember anything. Shortly thereafter, I don't hear any more rustling of leaves coming from outside, and my dog is now silent and ready to burrow underneath the blankets. Q doze off to slumberland, only to wake up 30 minutes later to another knock, this time on the front door. I literally feel my heart pumping so fast that I grab the landline, no cell service here, and dial 911. My dog is now at the door barking furiously. I reach the adjacent town's 911 emergency service and back frantically state what is happening, all while my dog is freaking out. The police from the adjacent town was on their way, but it was going to take a while to get to my house. I stay online with the dispatcher, and things start to calm down again, and I basically state I'm pretty sure I got it from there until the police arrive. I hang up and very carefully look out the side window, only to see a man standing directly in the front of the door. No movement from him at all, just the blank stare at the door. I grab the mace, and my dog state very loudly that the police are on their way. No reply back. I'm literally thinking the guy was on drugs at this point. This area where I grew up had the meth problem. I open the front door. The doors in this house have a secondary door for a windowed screen. It's locked, and it would take effort to get in because the screen plus triple pane. Yeah. I look into his face and basically ask what he wants, and told him that the police are about to be here. He just stares blankly. Pause for what must have been the longest 20 seconds in my life. He opens his mouth and asks if I want to play a game with him. After that, I immediately shut the door and yell back furiously, "Oh no, absolutely not." I literally wait in the bedroom and watch him on my porch for about 5 minutes, just staring blankly at the door. No movement whatsoever. He finally turns around and just walks away. About 20 minutes later, the cops show up and I'm basically describing everything frantically. I literally peed my pants earlier with how terrifying everything was. The cops basically state that there is a guy in my town that has schizophrenia and is going through late-stage Alzheimer's and sometimes wanders around people's homes. Needless to say, they found him and took him back to his caretakers. The cops asked if I had anywhere else to go. I basically packed everything up and bolted to my father's house with my dog and stayed there for the remainder of the break. Thank you all so much for listening to the stories in this special Christmas episode of True Scary Stories to help you fall asleep. If you enjoyed, please like, comment, and subscribe. We got new videos that come out every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And I would also like to thank all of our channel members. Thank you so much to Sherry Uchel, Zane Loggins, Martha APS, Hail Mary, Gingerbread, Carrie Morris, Crystal, Brown Doe, Jado, Sarah Rodriguez, Inner Scare Wifey, Chili, Snowing Wine Drops, Tina Mead, Taylor Ruist, Claire, Casey Brown, Caroline Hawksworth, Eric Donter, The Grim Reaper's Nightmare, Simply Complicated, Tangela Young, Miss Cannabis, Anon Q, Mathematica, Christy Goodall, Skincrawler, Taryn, Ruby Wilson, Jennifer Moyer, Classic Sonic the Hedgehog, Cappy Karma, Paul Reese, Via Mash K0101, and Honey Pond. I appreciate each and every one of you. I also appreciate every view, every like, every comment, every subscriber. You all mean the absolute world to me. Thank you so much. And I hope everyone has a very scary Christmas and a fearful New Year. Please enjoy the extra ambiance at the end of this video. Good night, everybody.